I'll be tagging that YouTube channel of a man who calls himself agnostic, but is really a militant atheist. And I will also be tagging Khaled because he appeared on the channel of that militant atheist who calls himself an agnostic, which I think is frankly fraudulent. I understand that sometimes you just want to be the piggy in the middle so that you are close to both sides of the argument. And you do this in order to, have friendlier communications with them. I do that because it is actually true that I'm agnostic, because I do accept that you cannot prove that God exists if that is your position, and you cannot prove that God doesn't exist, conclusively anyway, to somebody determined to believe in the opposite. So I don't want to argue about it, and I want to actually argue about things that I can prove. And that's why I keep going on at Khaled to use different forms of argument and stick to just one, because people are really stupid and they won't be able to understand your complicated arguments. And you just have to stick on one. And in these long form conversations, there'll be a lot of back and forth if that is a format allowed. And you just argue the whole thing through. There will be a lot of repetition, the usual accusations, and you'll have to deal with them. But he prefers to lecture them with his Google Docs and his, quoting the Quran. And you know from the chat that they are just exploding with hatred, at the very idea of talking to some, ethical monotheist. Just have a look at the chat. I'll be I should have linked that discussion in the description, and I'll do it now. And you will be able to listen to what they said afterwards. And it's really important to understand where it went wrong. And Khaled complains that I complain about him, and that's fine. I do complain because I just think it's such a waste of time to cram the entire syllabus that you're trying to teach in one lesson and keep saying, I'll just quickly say, and what's the point of quickly saying anything if nobody gets it? You have to slow it right down for the Islamophobic morons, right? You really have to slow it down. And at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is argue about the meaning of words. And you are arguing about who is an Islamophobe. And you have to prove that the people who don't agree with you are in some way dishonest, illogical, and immoral. Yep, that is really the sum of it all. And that is why That is why I say there is no difference between religion and politics, because ultimately it is about I am right and you are wrong. I am good and you are evil, and therefore I have to fight you to the death. It does come down to that. Of course, we hope it doesn't happen. And of course, we hope that the government will wish to prevent that. But the thing is, do they? They seem, the government seems to be stupid, mad, or evil. And we don't know which. And that is why so many people are suicidal, neurotic, can't make up their minds about anything. And the government denies them the spiritual comforts of religion and, in fact, wants to turn religious people atheist or are messing around with Christian beliefs and trying to get Christians to think of themselves as atheists by introducing all kinds of ideas about the abolition of hell and saying everyone has a reasonable chance of getting to heaven, which it seems the powers that be have made the late Pope Francis say when he said everyone has a reasonable chance of getting to heaven. And this understandably outraged and infuriated all that Catholic guilt. I'm sure ultra Orthodox Jews would be outraged at the idea that heretical secular Jews would have a reasonable chance of getting to heaven equal to theirs when they have been observant all their lives. Where's the justice of that? So the sense of unfairness is equivalent to a teacher saying he won't mark your examination papers that you studied so hard for. He's just going to throw them down the stairs. And whichever examination paper lands on the top of the stairs, he's going to give a good mark to, and whichever one ends up at the bottom of the stairs, he's going to fail. Imagine that. And now I'm reminded of Olson, who said he did that as a science teacher, and I think he got into trouble with it, with doing that. Imagine a teacher into mock examination papers. I must remember to tag him in the description later. Please do subscribe to my primary shadow ban channel to, if only to check out what's so dangerous about it. Obviously, it's not completely illegal because then it wouldn't be allowed, but all the ideas in it expressed are obviously antithetical to the matriarchy. And then we have to ask ourselves, what is a matriarchy? And when I tell you, when I define it easily and simply in a memorable way, people will instantly forget. Matriarchy is a society prioritizing the preferences of married parents who want to properly parent their legitimate offspring. A matriarchy is a society prioritizing the preferences of non-parents and unmarried parents who casually conceived and parented their illegitimate offspring. So if I were to ask you which society is likely to do better, the answer is obvious, isn't it? So China is doing so much better than the West because, well, at least they try to solve their problems with facts and logic, unlike Westerners who are forced into subscribing to the luxury beliefs of liberalism, which they refuse to codify. And the people below just don't understand it when I say you have to ask them what is the name of your current political orthodoxy. That is all you need to do online and in real life at social events. What is the name of the Western political orthodoxy? Is it feminism? Is it liberalism? Is it Christianity? Ask what it is. Why can't you? I think it's because the bottom has fallen out of Western masculinity, and again, they're not going to be admitting that anytime soon because they would be understandably, predictably ashamed. And so they will keep clinging to their Christianity and keep praying to Jesus in order to cling to their Christianity, in order to cling to their middle class status, which they won't if their government can they won't be a middle class because the Western governments are basically they're basically getting rid of that. Will we will the West be returning to feudalism? They don't seem to want a working class. They don't seem to want a middle class. They think AI is going to sort everything out, but AI will make people stupid because they will predictably become over reliant on it and not even be able to see when AI is tricking them. You can't get around AI by asking it the right questions, but well, if people can't even ask me questions when they don't agree with me and instantly press the block button like Brutus, who studied philosophy at university, what is the point? What is the point? So Brutus is this British, and I mean by that white ethno-nationalist who is Hindu. Why is he Hindu? Because he rejects the Abrahamic God. He rejects the Abrahamic God because he hates Jews and Muslims. It really is as simple as that. So anyone coming up to you and saying they're pagan, they've already confessed to you that they're only pagan because they hate the Abrahamic God, and they hate the Abrahamic God because they hate Jews and they hate Muslims and they hate themselves for having been tricked into worshipping a Jew. It really is as simple as that. And you can confirm it if you don't believe me by asking them which pagan deity they worship, and they won't be able to tell you because paganism to them is just a category to show their rejection of the Abrahamic God because they hate Jews and they hate Muslims and they hate themselves and their ancestors for having been tricked into worshipping a Jew. As long as you understand this, then you have an understanding of the unofficial Western belief system of anti Semitism and Islamophobia. And finally, we get to the subject of this title. What is my definition of Islamophobia? You are an Islamophobe, even if you've never said you hate Muslims, because A, you won't explain. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be doing two things at the same time, but I feel I have to share this live stream. You are an Islamophobe if you've ever complained about your government as a social conservative and reject the solution of Sharia. That's what you are. I'm so sorry to have to inform you that this is what you indeed are, because if you reject Sharia, while not being able to think of anything better, then of course you're an Islamophobe. Oh yes, and you refuse to read the Quran, and you refuse to discuss it any further, as Brutus did, because calling himself a Hindu is hardly white ethno-nationalism, is it? So he keeps blocking me because he cannot resolve his internal contradictions. How can a white man who is proud of his race become a Hindu? It's absurd. And if I go on about that too much, he's going to block me. But he's not, the only person who blocks me. I know a Chinese Catholic, and for some reason he keeps saying he stays in the West. He stays in the West and moans about the West and says it will be taken over by Muslims. And I thought, well, there's already a contradiction there. If you hate Muslims and you have the option of going back to China, why are you staying in the West? And also, if you cling to your Catholicism, why would you do that if you know that you cling to your Catholicism when you know that Catholics lost the wars of the Reformation? Why? And then he blocks me. So I interpret that as a win, basically. When you block me and because you have no answer, you're really conceding that I've won the argument. But of course, you don't care about arguments. You only care about your feelings, your hurty feelings. And this is a sign of infantilism. Because you're a man, you're a grown man, and you think you can talk politics and you're so clever and you can't accept facts. I haven't been able to get anyone to discuss with me the nature and purpose of religion. And this is something I will have to ask these militant atheists that I know. I will have to challenge them on the subject. I've been trying to engage with people. What do you think is the nature and purpose of religion? And all I get is silence, because I guess they can't even begin to answer the question, because once they even begin to engage on the subject of what is the nature and purpose of religion, they would have to slide into agreement with me. And presumably that is why they just won't engage. Even the people with degrees in philosophy, like Brutus, who has blocked me. Can secular political ideologies become a religion? Of course, of course. You talk to any Chinese person and he will talk about Marxism as if it were a religion. He would talk about Marxism the same way a Westerner would talk about liberalism as the state religion. So everything comes under liberalism. All the because liberalism presumes to limit the practice of all the inferior ideologies, and that would include Christianity, and that would include Islam, and all the rest of it. And currently, I'm challenging Caleb Morpin to a debate on representative democracy, because representative democracy is a foundational pillar of Western liberalism. And we already know from America how it is not really intended to operate as government by referendum because of the electoral college and all the kind of safeguards in case the American people vote for the wrong person. So what happens is that the Americans have to vote for the electoral college, and the electoral college might agree that whoever is a presidential candidate it does become president. But that they could actually say no, the people have voted for the wrong person, and even though it is a majority, we're not going to allow it. So that's the purpose of the electoral college. Otherwise, it could be one man, one vote, or government by referenda. So all these safeguards are meant to put a spanner in the works of direct democracy. So why have this complicated system when you could just have various important groups of society represented by a leader and let these people choose a leader? So what do I mean by important groups of society? Well, you would have to acknowledge their legality, right? So some of you may know that I favour the reintroduction of slavery because neither the Bible nor the Quran forbid it. And just to show that I am going by the book, for people who claim that I don't even believe in God and I'm not even Muslim and I can't even read Arabic. I'm going by the book. I'm going more by the book than born Muslims, Muslims who've been to madrasa and refused to engage with me using their real name. They don't want to be answering any questions either. So if God, if he exists, has not forbidden slavery, then how dare humans abolish slavery? These Britons and these Americans are still congratulating themselves on having banned slavery, but back to the issue of banning hell, because you're a universalist. Who gave you? Who made you boss? Who made you boss of God? If God clearly said that hell exists and heaven exists, then who are you to go and ban it? And you would argue, really, that Jews do not want a Torah theocracy, do they? You really cannot find any Jews who want a Torah theocracy, not even amongst the ultra-Orthodox. Because even the ultra-Orthodox say, when the Messiah comes, everything will be all right. We won't all be... we won't all be dead and in heaven. It will take place on earth. And you just wonder how it's all going to work. And one Jew on X said, well, our free will be taken away. And a Gentile in his space, who was, very philo-Semitic, said, no, I don't want that. I don't want my free will to be taken away. But that's an, interesting issue, isn't it? That people would rather live in an imperfect society than have their free will taken away, because I guess their free will is their identity, and they would. Well, the thing is, it's already been given to you by God if He exists. If you read the Quran, there it is, free will. I've given you free will. You do what you like, but here are my rules. You choose whether to obey them or not. And there will be a reckoning. That is the bargain, which for some reason many people don't understand. Or, it's really very simple. But if you take the narrative of the end times seriously, then obviously the end times will be a different kind of existence to the one we have now. So either we have our free will taken away, or the universe will end and we will all be taken to our assigned destination, and there will be no more reincarnation, because there will be no more world for us to continue existing, to sin or not sin. So let us imagine human existence and its timeline, and that reincarnation is a kind of snakes and ladders game. Universalists believe that everyone will be united with God, but then they also say, as Luke Thompson does, that hell exists. Not that it matters what Luke thinks, but we have to think of how the process would be applied logically. So we can accept the logic of, if there was a beginning to the universe, there will also be an end to the universe. And in this timeline of the universe existing, man will be allowed to exercise his free will to to show that he knows the difference between good and evil in theory and in practice. It's not enough to know in your own mind what it is that you have to do, but not do it. You have to know what you're supposed to do and actually do it. And then you pass both the theory and the practice. And all of you who've ever taken music lessons will know that there is a theory test and there is a practical test. And there's no point, you won't be considered, you won't be getting the benefit of it if you know musical theory perfectly, but you cannot play a single note, nor sing. You won't get the purpose of learning about music, which is to be able to play it. Anyone can enjoy music, but not everybody can sing or play. So we have to understand the purpose of doing anything. I see I've wandered off the subject of Islamophobia, but I'm saying if you have any concept of reasoning, and in particular moral reasoning, which is what I'm really on about as a moral philosopher, you would have to accept that all groups need a raison d'etre for their existence. And I have previously said that you could be a gang of pirates and you may have the raison d'etre of piracy. That would be the purpose of your existence, even if it's not a legal one. And your ability to practice piracy would depend on how long you survive before the authorities get you or incorporate your activities into a government department like the British East India Company, I suppose. As we know, all empires are obtained by war and piracy. And that is the reality of marine empires. They have a better run navy and they are better able to operate piracy than the navies of other countries, and then eventually they establish their empire, having defeated the others, and then they will be laying down the rules as if they were the government. That's how it works. So Trump has been very helpful in a way in making the point that the American Navy is a practitioner of American piracy. And obviously, American piracy will have to be run properly to continue. And if it's too mean to the other countries will rise up and rebel and actually organize themselves better in order to defeat the piratical hegemon. So we're now back to the issue of words, of piracy, of imperialism, of imperial reform. And this is what secular Quranism is intended to be. It's meant to assist the American empire in becoming a better run empire. And I'm very confident that I can win all the arguments. So as far as Caleb Morpin is concerned, he's, well, very creditably, he's saying American imperialism as it is, and as it has operated, has been very cruel and very unfair to other countries. But wasn't America founded on imperialism? It was founded by British imperialism, and then the early Americans decided they wanted to reject the religion of the British monarch, which is Christianity. And then Justice Brewer, in the case of the Church of the Holy Trinity against the United States, wanted to confuse the issue by claiming that America is a Christian nation, and therefore the vicar sent from the Church of England to America did not infringe on the Alien Contract Act, because way back then the Americans were complaining about immigrants, and they were saying they didn't want any more immigrants coming to America, and it didn't matter what race they were. So there was a flood of Europeans who, obviously wanted to arrive in the New World to make their fortune after realizing that it was almost impossible to earn an honest living in Europe, and which is riven by war. There were plenty of wars in the 1800s, and lots of Germans wished to avoid conscription, but they found that they had to fight in some wars anyway. It seems unavoidable. I mean, the only way to avoid war is to have better government and to care about foreign policy, which sadly, even now, people just can't be asked into taking an interest. They just prefer the mainstream narrative of their own history and the history of the countries that their government invades in their name. So basically, you could argue, if you were an American imperialist, that to be anti-imperialist, as Caleb Morpin says he wants to be, is in fact un-American. And what could be worse for an American than to be accused of being un-American? Though I've noticed that Americans don't accuse each other of being un-American anymore. And this means that they would rather accuse each other of being racist, fascist, Nazi, misogynist, etc. Because really, unconsciously, they have agreed, they have submitted to the political heresy of our time, which I say is intersectional feminism. Why don't American Christians ever want to discuss Christian theology? Because it's such a mess that they dare not even begin to untangle it, presumably because they fear accusations of heresy from other Christians. And as Christians, they would know how vicious other Christians can be from history alone. So what I'm proposing for them is something that would just sweep away all the problems. They can think whatever nonsense about Christianity they want, After all, Mormons are a category of Christian, aren't they? And what about Unitarian Christians? Are they actually more Muslim than Christian? These issues are as yet unresolved. I have my own ideas of resolving them, but it doesn't seem that they're capable of discussing it. They just want to gather themselves into groups and pretend to be Christian, but they don't really discuss anything much other than to form prayer chains and chit chat, but never even show they care enough about their Christianity to ask themselves which Christian denomination won the wars of the Reformation. Or is it even now being fought? Or is there some kind of CIA narrative being woven about the reconciliation of the Church of England and the Catholic Church, which suggests that the CIA is weaponizing Christianity against Westerners. And why is that a bad idea? It's a bad idea simply because Christianity is whatever the powers that be say it is. Because even with the best will in the world, the New Testament is not written by God. So what would be the point of codifying a bunch of books, not even from God? Which don't even make sense anyway, which contradict each other. So we know from American history that there exists the Jefferson Bible, and we also know that Jefferson hated the Trinity. And his Jefferson Bible is a very redacted version of the New Testament. So he basically allows only the reported speech of Jesus into his Jefferson Bible, and it's basically an echo of the Red Letter Bible, and the Red Letter Bible is really the words of Jesus as reported by his apostles, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And very, very tellingly, the Pauline epistles are entirely absent, because Jefferson, as a lawyer, knew that the Pauline epistles are merely hearsay. What is hearsay? It is not direct evidence of the thing being claimed. So the testimony of the rules of hearsay, I'm just not going to pretend to be able to give a lecture on it without being challenged. But basically, you have witnesses who said, I saw so and so kill so and so. Here's the best example. So that's direct evidence. It is testimony of, a witness witnessing a murder, but it's only hearsay if a witness said, I heard so and so said the murderer was so and so. You see how confusing it has become. But anyway, direct evidence is basically, direct evidence of the thing being claimed. So the direct evidence for the existence of God would be the Torah and the Quran, because Jews believe their Torah to come from God, and which is given to Moses on Mount Sinai, and Muslims believe that the Quran was the directly revealed word of God as dictated by the angel Gabriel to Muhammad, who then just repeated it. And it doesn't matter whether you believe in it or not. The point is, this is what Jews and Muslims believe. But what do Christians really believe? What is the basis of their beliefs? So we can go back to the New Testament, and basically all the instructions of how to be Christian come from Paul, and Paul never met Jesus. And all kinds of questions arise about his Damascene conversion. Who was there? Who was there to witness, him having a fit on his way to Damascus? All these questions are never, ever properly examined, because understandably Christians don't want anyone questioning their narrative. And anyway, a lot of these Christians don't really believe. They don't really literally believe in the Trinity or worship it. They use Christianity as a way of raising their status, because if you say you don't like Jews, you don't like Muslims, and you're a pagan, people will just know, oh, you're low status, you're a white nationalist. And we know what happens to white nationalists, and we know what kind of people white nationalists are. They're basically trailer trash who don't go to church, who are definitely not middle class, and who are getting the short end of the stick where their matriarchy is concerned, and they can't do anything, and they're really stupid, and they're really, they're not up to much. They're just angry, lower class, low information, low status, low income people, and we can afford to ignore them. And so the only group of Americans who might possibly challenge the matriarchy, whose existence they have yet to acknowledge, because Caleb Maupin is not acknowledging the matriarchy. And I'm saying, to be a matriarchy means that, you have a mortal, moral, social disease, and your society is just going to rot from the inside out until the problems are addressed. And you probably won't do it, because when you're a matriarchy, most people are atheists, and even people who are not atheists, who claim to believe in whatever religion they claim to believe in, they don't really believe in the whole thing. They're only doing it to be free riders, to benefit from a higher status than they would otherwise enjoy. If they just said they were, white nationalists who hate Jews and Muslims and don't, and think Christians are morons for believing in the nonsense that they have been, in the nonsense of the Trinity. And on the question of the Trinity, I find that a lot of educated Christians, pastors, priests, you can go all the way up to the Pope, and they won't be able to defend the Trinity, and that's why they will never discuss it, because traditionally they would just win the argument, win in quotes, by burning you at the stake or socially excluding you, until the founding fathers showed that they had a better idea. by quarantining Christianity from their state. And now the chickens have come home to roost. Washington said, we must, with caution, with caution, indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Now, what did he mean? He meant that in the absence of a religion that supports the institutions of marriage and the family, your national goose is cooked. That's what he's saying. Now, Caleb won't engage on this because, well, he's not married. Sorry, he's not a married father. He is married, but he's not a married father. And whatever his reasons, that does tend to weaken his authority. Because if you want to support the patriarchy, then you would have to be a married father with grown-up children who are a credit to you. That is basically how it used to work under the patriarchy. And I know he tries to straddle the right and the left, and he has to be a little indulgent about, the woke meaning intersectional feminism. He has to be kind about, gay people, unmarried parents, etc., etc. And he thinks he can get away with it. And I'm saying, there's no point. There is no point if you're just going to tinker around at the edges and not address the issue. But perhaps he enjoys trying to get money and organize courses and conventions, etc. But what is the point? What is the point if you don't actually deal with the festering problem, which you refuse to acknowledge is the problem? So the problem is the unaddressed problem of matriarchy, which is the unofficial religion of intersectional feminism, which means the continued undermining of the institutions of marriage and the family. And I'm saying marriage is eugenic, illegitimacy is dysgenic, and I guess Caleb Morpin doesn't want to say that. He doesn't want to alienate his potential supporters. So he's thinking by talking about government of action, governing for working families and all that. Well, how is he going to do it? How is he going to do it? Crickets. So I'm saying, well, in a way, it's easy for me. I don't have to organize anything. I'm just a political theorist who's saying what I think the problem is. And I'm just waiting for somebody to agree with me, or if they don't agree with me, to argue with me, and they won't do it. So if Caleb Morpin refuses to argue with me about it, what does it mean? I guess he thinks he can't win. Perhaps he's been advised by his supporters not to even engage with me, and in order to deprive me of the oxygen of publicity. Which is, of course, a dishonest and cowardly tactic. So, in his most recent stream, he has said, I think in his most recent stream, it would be, if you want to find it, it would be 108. if you want to find it on the so he mentions me and he says, "Oh, Claire's mad at me because um, I won't because she thinks I still support representative democracy." And he said, "Oh, but I wasn't talking about that." And I said, "Yeah, I know you're not talking about that because you don't want to be seen to be challenging representative democracy." Well, I do. And I'm saying, if you don't challenge representative democracy, you're not even facing the problem. And I'm saying, it's not just me saying representative democracy is a problem. It's George Washington saying it. So he knows I go on about George Washington, and he's saying, "Oh, I don't know what she's talking about. I'm not even talking about George Washington." And I'm saying, "Yeah, I know you're not talking about George Washington because you don't want to be seen to be challenging representative democracy because it is a sacred cow of Western political orthodoxy, which even the Russians have submitted to, it seems, because not even Dugin, who's a pussycat really, not even Dugin has said that he wants to return to a one-party state. Putin is not going to live forever. So, I mean, if you're going to be any kind of political theorist, you at the least you should be doing is thinking of a system that you want to perpetuate, even though you won't be around to see it. So Caleb Morpin, who runs the Centre for Political Innovation, won't be seen to be engaging with me. He will, mention me from time to time to show that I am opposing him. But it seems to me that Caleb Morpin just likes, easy rides with people like Garland Nixon who won't argue with him. When did he ever argue with anybody? There was only, Stefan Molyneux, as far as I know. And I guess he won't be wanting to argue with me about representative democracy because he doesn't want to be seen to be giving me the oxygen of publicity because his idea is, well, obviously he thinks his idea is better than mine, and I'm saying my idea is better than his because I've covered everything. I've covered the problem which I will address. So I'm saying the West is a matriarchy, and we have to restore the patriarchy with the Sharia light of secular Quranism with American characteristics. That's what I'm saying, and obviously that would eclipse innovationism because innovationism is basically him saying, "Oh, I'm no longer communist because it causes conflict, of course." Oh yes, and he rejects dialectical materialism, and but you see, dialectical materialism is the most attractive thing about Marxism because it's a truism, and a truism is something that's obvious, So Hegel said that there are all these ideas floating around, and then ideas generate their own opposition, and then these opposing ideas are synthesized. And that's why you could say that Judaism is a thesis about not worshipping other gods, about idolatry being the worship of anything that isn't God. And Christianity, you could say, is precisely about worshipping something that isn't God, i.e., Jesus. And Jews and Muslims, however much they hate each other, would agree on that. They would agree on the oneness of God and agree that Jesus is not God. And the difference between Jews and Muslims about their attitude towards Jesus is that Jews hate Jesus and think he's the illegitimate son of a Roman soldier called Panthera. And while Muslims are polite about Jesus and even admit him to be a prophet of God and even acknowledge the virgin birth, which is not biologically impossible when you consider that splash pregnancies are possible. So now we come to the issue of the Trinity. So, when did Jesus become God? That is a question. And the Trinity says that Jesus is co-equal, co-eternal, and co-substantial with God. And this means that before the world, Jesus existed. So that's the claim, right? And then they use verses in the Old Testament in the book of Genesis to claim that the coming of Jesus was foretold in the Old Testament, which of course Jews disagree with. But if the Muslim interpretation is accepted, then it resolves the issue completely. So, because it says that, well, we're going to respect Jesus and Mary, but we're going to deny his divinity and the divinity of Mary, because there was a Marian cult under Catholicism in ancient times, because obviously it was quite easy to, make statues of a beautiful woman holding a baby and, get women to like such an idea, and also men to, buy into it, and men feel more comfortable praying to a woman because they, if they're heterosexual, they can, remember the feelings of worship when they fall in love with a beautiful woman, etc., etc. And also, America has a kind of unofficial deity called Columbia, yes? And Columbia is expressed as a beautiful woman. And there's even a poster of Columbia holding her arms out to men, as if asking for help so that they would join the army and fight the Germans in World War One. So, all these ideas are very manipulative. And even in the Quran, there's a verse saying that, well, before Allah took over, the tendency of Arabs would be to worship female goddesses and rebuking these people for saying, well, if you worship female deities, then why do you kill your female children? Why do you kill your female infants? And there is no getting round the issue of gender relations being more fairly and better resolved by respecting the institution of marriage in order to provide better parenting, to rear the next generation in optimum conditions, because the optimum conditions would be the child would know who their biological parents are, who would jointly rear them and their siblings. And this is really the minimum condition necessary to not become degenerate. And this Caleb refuses to discuss. And I am actually a member of the CPI. And, well, I don't know how much I have given to him over time, but you would have thought that the least I deserve is an interview. And I've already said to him, yes, you know, you can come on my channel just to talk about your ideas, and I'll give you, well, I will give you some pushback on your ideas and how you think you're going to get things done. He supports a third party. I've got a clip of him saying he supports a third party. But he may not bite. And if he doesn't, then I think I'm the one who deserves to go on Tucker Carlson. Oh, yes. And before I forget, you can look. You can Google my name or secular Quranism. Just Google secular Quranism. I was so pleased yesterday to not even Google my own name, but I wanted to find one of my own posts on Substack on the issue of moral reasoning, and I found, to my delight, a quite coherent and explanation of what secular Quranism is all about. And then I, because I was thinking of Caleb Morpin and how he, refused to even engage with me other than to mock me for apparently not understanding his ideas and offending him for not understanding his ideas. Well, I would say that, maybe you should do a test of all the people who listen to you and see how much they actually understand of your ideas. Just do a multiple choice. I'm sure I would pass with flying colours, but I bet the others wouldn't. Because really, it's a cult of personality, isn't it? What he's doing is a cult of personality. And I'm saying there's no point being a cult when the American government is against you with all its apparatus of state to mock you and discredit you. I mean, if they have control of the media, there's and social media, of course, they have control over social media, which is why I am shadow banned. But at least AI Overview will produce something coherent when you ask it a question about secular Quranism. And I looked up innovationism without. You see, the point is, I didn't Google my own name. I only Googled secular Quranism, and it produces a description. But innovationism, it doesn't even mention Caleb Morpin because well, it just doesn't. And I pointed that out to him, but well, the thing is, I understand he doesn't want my idea to rival his, but isn't this a problem of political activism that that the people closest to you are in fact the ones that are most treacherous to you? Well, why wouldn't you give yourself more publicity by engaging with a rival idea? Why not? Because you're afraid? You're afraid that secular Quranism is better put together than so-called innovationism, which actually removes the best thing about Marxism, which is the truism of dialectical materialism. and say, oh, I don't like dialectical materialism because it's about conflict. It's like, yeah, of course, it's always about conflict. There will always be internal enemies and external enemies, and an in group and an out group. And of course, you still need a group, or, or you want to say everybody is in your group. But even if everybody is Marxist or Muslim or whatever, there will be people who will be the internal enemies of, Islam or Marxism or whatever ideology it is that you wish to, that you subscribe to. So, and the only way to deal with these subversives and internal enemies is to have clear rules. I don't think innovationism has any clear rules. And I'm saying by using the Quran, you will be able to see who is a subversive by identifying hypocrites. And hypocrites are people who don't really believe in the moral and belief system that they are a member of, and they will find irrational and irrelevant reasons not to. And once you identify the hypocrite, then you can call them out. So actually, I'm talking myself into thinking I have completely defeated Caleb on the construction, the strength of the construction of secular Quranism. Because even AI is saying that it can get some sense of my ideas and how it might be useful in political application. And well, that is a kind of achievement, though nobody is giving me any prizes. And I do think it's cowardly of Caleb not to engage with me. I've even told him, like, well, you've appeared, you've been talking to academic agent. Academic agent knows about secular Quranism, but he won't talk about it. Of course, he won't talk about it because it upsets his viewers and subscribers, who are Islamophobes to a man. So what's the point of complaining about a problem and then rejecting the solution without looking at it properly? So the mindset is this. There is a problem. Oh, it's so terrible. It's those Jews, it's those Muslims are coming. They're, here, they're subverting our wonderful civilization. And you say, well, these people that you complain about, well, they obviously have a superior religion, superior even to Christianity. And they're just playing the game of catch up, these white nationalists, after being told by, after Jared Taylor was told by E. Michael Jones that race cannot be their religion and that white nationalists have no rights. Well, at least Catholics still have some rights. They thought, oh, okay, well, we better get ourselves a religion. Oh, there are all these kinds of Christianity. Obviously, Protestantism isn't working because it's so Zionist and okay, well, Catholicism has never been that Zionist because Catholicism was out of the game. Catholicism, as represented by the Spanish Empire, was replaced by the British Empire, which was Protestant, and that's why the British Empire was so into getting Israel. There was William Blake's poem that they turned into an imperial hymn that they still sing at important state events, with the royal family. And of course, a marine empire would want to control Israel for geopolitical reasons. I mean, what do you think, all this fuss in the Strait of Hormuz is about? It's about controlling international shipping and the delivery of oil to the rest of the world. That's what it's about. It's not because, the British are so religious and they think of building Jerusalem and England's green and pleasant land and all that crap. And one of the things I was trying to tell Caleb was that, that there was such a thing as British Israelism, which is a pseudo religion created by the British. And I actually know British Israelites, and they still have a church in Orange Street in London. And it's a pseudo religion intended to get British Gentiles to go and live in Israel, believing, after being made to believe that they're one of the lost tribes of Israel. And these Jews, well, or is it the CIA really? They keep, thinking, aha, here's one of the lost tribes of Israel in China, in Japan, that's a narrative. They can't prove it, but if they can get enough people to believe in it, then these people will think they're Jews and they want to be Jews because it's so glorious and romantic and holy and kosher or whatever it is that they've been made to think it is, and then they'll do the thing that their empire wants them to do, which is to go and live in God-forsaken places and fight and die for the empire. I mean, that's what it's all about. And therefore, Jews, I haven't read E. Michael Jones's Holocaust narrative, but the Holocaust narrative, which is basically the narrative of World War II, is a kind of holy writ to the Anglo-American Empire, isn't it? You're not allowed to question it because it's heresy. You're not allowed to question it even in Israel. Jews are not allowed to deny their own Holocaust. And we know Rabbi Mizrahi, an ultra-Orthodox rabbi, cannot even discuss the Holocaust, because he actually said that the definition of Jew in Germany was far too wide, because the traditional Orthodox definition of who is a Jew was that your mother has to be a Jew, and then you're at least by race Jewish. And this meant that because the Nazis considered anyone a Jew if one of their four grandparents is a Jew, he was saying that was far too wide, and therefore he divided 6 million by 4 and got 1 million. And that was what he said, and he was forced to apologize. So even Jews cannot deny their own Holocaust. Why not? Because I guess for the American Imperium, they want the definition of Jew to be as wide as possible, so they can be got to think of themselves as being Jewish, and then want to be even more Jewish by going to live and work in Israel, and thereby providing a labor force for the secular state of Israel, because the real Jews, the really religious Jews who learn Torah all day and night, don't want to join the IDF. So this is really the narrative that I want to, that Caleb and I disagree on, because he wants to talk about, Israel, we're controlled by Israel, and, boo hoo hoo, Thomas Massey didn't win. And I'm saying, well, it's because of the party system that stopped Thomas Massey from winning, and which he refuses to question because it's a sacred cow and he doesn't want to go that far, probably. So I'm saying Israel is an American colony. And Caleb doesn't agree, but he won't argue about it either. And actually, I'm so sick and tired of all these anti-Semites saying, oh, Israel this, Israel that. And then their head explodes when I say it's an American colony. It's obviously it's an American colony. How can little Israel do all these things if America did not give it its unwavering support, which means that they're only doing it for imperial reasons. And this must mean that Israel is a proxy of America. But of course, for these anti-Semites who've always hated Jews, and they've hated their Jews all their lives, and they're about 60 or 70 or something, they're not going to give up their beliefs. They're going to say, oh, how could you say such heresy? Of course, Israel controls us. We are but a colony of Israel, and they refuse to argue about it, right? They will always refuse to argue about it because they know they cannot win. And this is the biggest secret of the founding of the American global empire, the utter control of the mass media, including social media platforms. So what does one to do when the global hegemon and all its apparatus of state are looking down on you in a rather hostile way? Do you pretend stuff ain't true that must be true? Do you avoid certain issues? Well, then you're not doing your job. I'm just a political theorist. So I guess I can sit here and tell you I have this theory about this, I have this theory about that, and you owe it to yourself, if you don't agree with me, to argue about it. You don't pretend not to understand what I'm saying, and then when I explain again, you still pretend not to understand it and say, oh, it is nothing to do with what you're talking about. If it is your plan, if it is your objective to improve the American government and make it care about ordinary Americans, then you have to consider the moral system that America is currently under. And it is currently under, well, it hasn't got a name, right? Is it intersectional feminism? Is that the religion of the West? And if so, well, you have to call it out, don't you? You have to ask, excuse me, Mr. US government. It's not Trump. Obviously, it's not Trump. He doesn't know anything, does he? It must be some constitutional lawyer or some academic or someone like that. And you have to ask him, could it be Sam Harris? Well, Tucker Carlson could, well, ask himself, who represents this Mr. US government person, and say, well, excuse me, what's the name of a moral system? What is it? Or is it just this idea that we can keep trusting Congress to make up the rules as it goes along? Is this a viable moral system, Caleb? And if it isn't, aren't you supposed to ask questions about it instead of going up and down the country and saying, oh, you're being so busy, you're giving speeches here and speeches there? Well, nobody cares about these people. They look at these people and say, they're never going to win. Look at them. Look at how they're dressed. Because fundamentally, most people will think like that. Look at how they're dressed. from the lower orders. They're only following the cult of Caleb. He's never going to get anywhere, but we can distract him by remonetizing his YouTube channel, and he can make some sort of a living, busying himself, giving these, meetings. There's no need. Just go straight to the top. Maybe get yourself on Tucker. I want to get myself on Tucker. I think Tucker Carlson genuinely wants to solve the problem. And if he were to talk to Caleb and then to me, I think I would have the benefit of it because I really have got all things covered. So Caleb has got this idea called innovationism, which isn't even exclusive to him because there are different kinds of innovationism with different people, different names associated with it. There's no other secular Quranist than me. It is a genuinely unique idea, and Caleb doesn't want to talk about it. He only wants, kind people who are going to not ask him questions and let him sit there and pump out his spiel. I actually want people to argue with me because my belief is that my ideas are unchallengeable. If you go by facts and logic, then all my premises are based on undisputed truth. And so I guess the only way for Caleb to get out of it is to never engage with me. And but if he were to engage with me and lose the argument, he would actually be helping his people, because then he can, talk about secular Quranism and wonder how it can help his people. And I've got all the answers ready for him, but all these sacred cows that he refuses to slay, such as usury and slavery and representative democracy and intersectional feminism, and he's not going to declare war against these sacred cows. Well, I do, because it's very easy to win the arguments against them. That was one important thing that I wanted to say, and it's gone out of my mind. But I think I've said enough, haven't I? Was it reasonably intelligible? I think so, because fundamentally there are still traces of the desire to believe in God in the American Republic. Thus, it still says on the American dollar bill that Americans trust in God to support their currency. Americans are supposed to be one nation trusting in God. Maybe we can have a chat about what kind of God. But there is only one. There is only one Abrahamic God, and only the Abrahamic God is worth discussing, because why else would you talk about a deity less powerful than the Abrahamic God? It would be illogical. Oh yes, I remembered what I was going to say now. Facts and logic. A lot of people think their beliefs are based on facts and logic because, in a way, facts and logic and morality are what everyone thinks their belief system conforms to. But of course they don't. So only if we can honestly argue about any of our ideas, but regard facts and logic as the ultimate decider of who wins the argument, will we, in the end, resolve and solve our problems? Resolve our issues and solve our problems. And I'm saying it's easy. All it requires is people like Caleb to engage with me and put aside their petty political reasons for not so doing. So Caleb, if you think you can win the argument about how wonderful representative democracy is, then doubtless you will be rushing to tell me off for not supporting it, for challenging it, for rejecting it. So for Americans, I have this question for you. You have been tricked again. You have elected a president who made promises to you that he immediately broke. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do about that, Americans? You're going to keep sucking it up? And if so, you deserve to lose. And if you don't even respect your founding father enough to read his speech and make a list of all the things he warned you against and work out how much of his warnings have been ignored. Yeah, work it out. Actually, there's a Wikipedia entry of George Washington's farewell speech. If you can't, read the whole thing through because you're educationally subnormal, your concentration is shot because you keep wanting to read your mobile phone notifications. The easier version is Wikipedia. But really, the most important thing you have to consider is Washington saying, we must with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Did he mean Christianity? Do you really think he meant Christianity? When there's been so many issues about separation of the church and state and what Justice Brewer said and whether if you had a referendum of American voters, whether they would say, yes, we are a Christian nation. Yes, I would like America to be a Christian nation officially. Yes, I would like a Christian amendment to be passed. And yes, I would still like a Christian amendment to be passed, even though it would implicitly abolish the First Amendment. Would they really say that? And what is the only scripture in the whole wide world that supports the First Amendment? It is the Quran. It is contained. The First Amendment is supported by chapter 2, verse 256 of the Quran. There is a White House Quran that belonged to Thomas Jefferson, who drafted the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, which later became the First Amendment. This is undisputed. I'm sure there will be many creative ways of disputing this, but and I would be happy to entertain any that come up. Otherwise, Caleb is wasting his time and wasting the money of others who keep contributing to his CPI by not even engaging with me. If he's so smart, then he can talk to me, can't he? And if you are a member of the CPI, as I am, don't you think he should be talking to me? Don't you think? he should at least be seen to address the issues I've raised. But I think he fears to alienate the Christian members of CPI, and therefore all his reasons for not engaging with me, for pretending not to understand what I'm saying, is political and tactical. And all who support him should ask themselves why they're giving up so much of their time and energy and money in supporting what is in effect a lost cause if it refuses to address the underlying causes of imperial decline. If their leader refuses to engage with me, then it means that he fears not winning the argument. And if you do not want him to engage with me, then I think you're probably an Islamophobe, right? And if you say you've never said anything mean about Muslims, you're still an Islamophobe if you refuse to read the Quran or my little book of 100 pages available on Amazon, or if you don't want to pay any of it, you can read secularquranism.blogspot.com, which has a virtual America operating under the principles of secular Quranism. I'm sure you're all too lazy to even read it, which supports my view that you're either too stupid to understand it or too afraid to open the box of what you think is a box of snakes and scorpions. And if you refuse to even look at it, it does mean that you are being irrational, because only by addressing all the issues I raise and defeating my arguments would you have won the argument. But if you refuse to even engage because you assume that you will lose the argument, then you have lost the argument. And you are therefore an Islamophobe, and obviously somebody who is suffering from a phobia would be less irrational than somebody who isn't suffering from any phobia, and I appeal to facts and logic as my final judge. And if you're not even prepared to go through this process, Caleb, then you must be a coward and one of those politicians that you're talking about. If you can't even face the truth about the inadequacy of your idea compared to mine, then you are taking the members of the CPI for a ride and depriving them of their time and their income by refusing to argue about it. I am serious about my idea. I've been doing it for years, as have you. I just don't see the point in organizing all these conventions and turning it into a personality cult and rejecting the most important pillar of Marxism, which is dialectical materialism, and saying, oh, but it causes conflict. Yes, it will always be conflict. Obviously, people disagree with you and me, and there must be a way of resolving it, and this must be by appealing to undisputed facts and the use of sound arguments. So, Caleb, if you're not able to appeal to undisputed facts and use sound arguments to win your argument against me, if that is too much for you and you don't think you're going to win, of course you're going to keep avoiding me. And I guess that makes you an Islamophobe, right? If you refuse to consider the superiority of Sharia in restoring patriarchy, if you don't even want to restore patriarchy, if you don't even want to consider the claim that the founding fathers were proto-Muslim, no hides, then you must be an Islamophobe. And calling yourself Christian without saying if you believe in the Trinity, if you know any church history. I'm happy to give a lecture on church history and American Christianity, even. I'm happy to do that. And you can, throw rocks at me and tell me what I've got wrong. But will he do that? Or just prefer wasting his time going hither and thither and having these conventions and Americans will never have heard of and will dismiss instantly, like the Uhuru Group? Or, well, I don't know what else he supports, but he might as well make it easy on himself and have all these comfortable internet arguments just sitting in his apartment in Brooklyn and talking to me and arguing with me instead of wasting everybody's time, going here and there and having easy interviews with Garland Nixon. Ultimately, I suppose one of us will win the argument when we get on Tucker Carlson. And I like to think that Tucker Carlson will be more interested in my ideas than his because secular Quranism is fully grown, fully clothed, and fully armed. And I do not think that Caleb Maupin's innovationism is going to cut it. How are you going to get all the things you want done without radically changing the political system? And if you keep ignoring the practicalities of changing the political system, or even talking about it in theory, or talking about, the problems in theory, you are obviously saying that you have lost.